My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue part 6 of the science of meditation, particularly Kundalini meditation. And I've been speaking about it in the last few sessions. And interestingly, I've been practicing this for a very long time. And, being myself somebody who's rational and a scientist, I always wanted to know, this whole meditation was shrouded in mystery. There's something magical. It's been written in all the scriptures by great saints and sages that, if you practice meditation, you would attain self-realization, God realization, your life will be better, you'd be healthy. All these I've read and heard Mahans speak about this. And I said, okay, this sounds very convincing. So, and at a very young age, I learned this meditation from His Holiness G.P. Mahan and, the gurus that were there at that time. And obviously, in the early days, things were very slow to really understand. And I remember Swamiji telling that practice this meditation properly, diligently. There are times that you get distracted, but remember, always keep the focus on that unarve and always, read, reflect, introspect, contemplate. And he says that it is not mystical. It is very scientific. It is very experiential. And he kept emphasizing this. While he was saying this, and I was practicing this meditation, but I was also reading a lot of great books by great saints and sages, and they describe about these mystical experiences. But they tell you meditate and you would get all these mystical experiences. And I remember practicing this and I didn't get the mystical experiences, and all the kind of amazing things that people are speaking about. It didn't occur to me. But one thing for certain that was happening was that I became more calmer, the focus became better, and slowly over time, um, my mind was more peaceful. But this is different from some of the magical experiences that people wrote about. And I remember going back and reading Swamiji's book, the I God book, and he was speaking about how that experience becomes more profound. And when the experience becomes more profound, your mind can actually focus on that vibration, the life force. And when the mind focuses on the vibration life force, slowly, you start feeling the resonation much more stronger. The mind becomes more anchored to it as opposed to being distracted by many other thoughts. So, and this is slowly starting to happen for me, not immediately, but took several months. And slowly the mind became more focused, more peaceful. So I started experiencing warmth in my body, a little bit of heat and all those things. So I say, hey, there's something is happening here, and I can feel the vibrations, the electromagnetic field, which I never felt before, more profound. And at that time, the experience became more profound, and I felt wanting to meditate, wanting to know this better. And as Swamiji's voice kept saying, science, you study science properly and you understand what I'm talking about. So those words were resonating with me. So I said, okay, maybe in those days there was no internet and things like that. So the good thing is that we had a compendium of encyclopedias. And in some of the encyclopedias, it talked about, meditation, the mind, and so on. So as I was in university, I started exploring, I was doing science and physics, and the notion of electromagnetism and all those things became more clearer. But, how does it, what has it got to do with the meditation? And as I started reading more deeper, then I realized that the whole universe is electromagnetic field, and our body is electromagnetic field, and our life force is also the electromagnetic field, bioelectromagnetic field. So I asked this question: is that Kundalini? Is that the life force that Swamiji is talking about? And one led to the other. Then I realized that everything in this universe is resonating with this electromagnetic field. And I remember reading this Nobel laureates that won this Nobel Prize that showed that the remnants of the Big Bang in the form of electromagnetic field is still there in the universe, and we can still experience that in the basis of everything else. So things were starting to connect. That what Swamiji was saying, what his concepts of the universe, the vibrations, everything was starting. And it came back to this notion that, is this what the Kundalini force is? Is this what the life force is? That our mind has not learned to lock on it because the mind is so preoccupied with the material experiences and material thoughts. And that is when everything came together, that, why I can't feel it is because I'm worried about exams and quizzes and, girlfriend things and all those things that an ordinary uh, youth or teenager would go through. But one thing was certain is that Mahan's voice and, advice that whatever you do, just keep practicing. And that's one thing that I kept. As I started practicing, and as I was studying, as I was introspecting, contemplating, reflecting on all my studies in physics and mathematics, I could feel that things were much more clearer. I could visualize things in my head, which I couldn't. I can really complicated mathematics was becoming like a poetry. So there was a change that was happening, and I have a difficulty in memorizing things, but I can visualize things better in my brain as time went on. So I was doing well in my studies and all those things. So there's something must be happening in me. And then I realized that I started reading a lot more of the literature, and I stumbled across this thing that when you practice meditation over a period of time, the structure of the brain starts changing, starts transforming. And then it got me interested in the brain itself, because that's the basis of the way we cognize this material world. We generate thoughts, we generate experiences, right? So this understanding of the brain became so important in this practice. That is the hardware which our software called the mind operates from. And I said, okay, this is really interesting. So I started zooming down, and I saw a picture of Mahan's I Got book about the brain, the 6 parts of the brain. That was really fascinating, and I was very happy that I did science and I was able to some extent, have a kind of a superficial understanding of the brain. So I started going a little bit more deeper and having access to a lot of scientific material. I started reading more in depth. So clearly, what was mystical was actually very, very uh, real in transforming the brain and the mind. And there was a beautiful passage in the scriptures that says that when one practices meditation, the structure and the chemistry of the brain, the blood, and the body changes. I say, wow, that seemed to be really interesting. So I dwell deeper in trying to understand what is happening in the brain. there must be some physiological and structural change that is happening, that consistent practice makes these changes take place. So, and it was clearly written in Mahan's I Got book, what happens? And I was not looking at it because it comes in the later part. But I was experiencing, so when I read that, somebody touches on it, and I dwelled deeper in it. And there was amazing literature that shows that the meditational practices, the yoga practices actually exercises the brains, you know, enhances the neural connectivity and the pathway. And when that happens, it sends, electromagnetic field and blood flow that makes part of our brain, particularly the gray matter and the white matter, grow. When there's growth there, you see that the neural pathway connectivity extends, gets deeper. And this is what somebody was saying, that when you practice Arivin telling you that as the experience gets through, we get deeper experience, the sense of clarity and understanding and awareness becomes more. So you put it in a word form, but this is what the experience was. So I started going deeper. This makes a lot more sense. So I started looking at the brain a little bit more carefully. What was happening? Was there structural changes that was happening? And I covered this in the last few classes on parts of the brains that were transforming and changing, that is giving that new experiences. I won't go into detail, but I'll tell you, I'm going to go through the changes that is happening in the brain. Now I understand that gives me a more magnified and more richer experiences of this material world and of the self. So I covered all this in the last few things on neurotransmitters or all this part of the brain. I won't go into detail. But basically, there's a structural change that is happening in the brain for prolonged periods of meditational practice. You may not see it in a month or 2 months, but over a period of time, you start seeing the changes happening in you, the deepening of the neural pathway, and different parts of the brains have different function. Nature has built us in that way. And when those things start developing, we see that our brain starts operating in a much more efficient way. As we age, parts of the brain, if we stop using it, we start losing it. It starts dying, and we have forgetfulness, vision problems, hearing problems, thinking. All those things comes on the onset of when we stop using our brains, particularly when we start aging. So I covered all this, and I want to go. There's about 11 regions in our brain that actually completely transforms, and we experience this, and I want to. I won't go into detail. You can refer back to the earlier one, but I want to spend some time on the regions that are very important. I covered the first 6 parts, right? So from neurotransmitters right up to the parietal lobe, which actually controls our limb movements, right? Talked about the master gland. When that part of the brain starts developing, our endocrinal system is managed properly. You see that our insulin and all those things that becomes more and more harmonized, right? The same thing we see that as we age, our movement coordination starts slipping because parts of the brain starting to shut down. The growth of that is much more lower than the death of some of those cells there. So that is why it's very important to meditate, to introspect, contemplate, reflect, and use your brain effectively, right? And if you don't, it is going to shut down. So I want to spend some time a little bit more on this part of the brain, which is what we call occipital lobe. This is something that I realized that, it didn't make sense in the beginning. When I started meditating, I found the grass was more greener. I can feel the trees sway better. I can feel the wind that is passing, touching my face. I can smell the oceans when I go to the beaches. The colors become more vivid. And I was wondering why this is the case. I mean, all the while I've been in the gardens and so on, but now it's become more the magnified. This happens over the years. And as I'm driving, there's a lot of trees before I just pass by, but now I can experience the vivid colors, the green colors and wonderful colors, and the visual part of the world became much more profound. Color, form, motion. This is something also very interesting, that any small movements before you miss it, but now you can experience this, the subtle movements. Before, wind was blowing in your face, you didn't feel it, but then every small subtle, wind or pressure or temperature, you feel it more magnified. So you see that, one of the things that the downside of this is that, this becomes more vivid, but in the early stages, I remember flying and, we get the pressure in our ears. It tend to be more magnified, and sometimes you find it very uncomfortable. So something was happening in the brain that actually enhances the experiences, so sensory, perspective of, or visual part of the world, the color coordinate, everything becomes really vibrant. Right? And this is something that we see partly because now I understand that, hey, before I didn't see the tree in this way, or before I missed the ants that was coming together, connecting. The small, small things that we missed in life, we become more aware of it. So awareness of nature in the most subtlest form becomes more profound. And there's a science behind this. I mean, we think this is magical, but actually there's a structural change that is having an impact on us. So I started reading the literature a little bit more carefully. And I realized that this part of our brains behind here is where the visual part of this material world. So that is why I say that our brain is the seat of our mind that enables us to experience this material world. And parts of the brain enables us to experience this. If that part is damaged or if that part dies, the visual world becomes less cognized. And this is true as we age. As we age, parts of the brain starts shutting down, particularly in the back. We see that our visual part becomes lessened, seeing becomes difficult. We color coordination goes out. Uh, you know, Form, we can't see form more clearly. But when we practice meditation, some of the structures that we see much more profound. Whereas as we age, we can't see things more profound, particularly facial recognition. We see that sometimes our uh, part is the parts of the brain is so refined we can actually see the differences in people. But when that part of the brain starts shutting down, we can't differentiate the facial differences. And the same thing with motion too, you see. So when that part of the brain shuts down, our own motor coordination gets disrupted, but also we can't see, things, the movements. That is why you see that when people age, there's a limit for driving because they can't coordinate that motion properly. So we see that as we practice meditation, that structural changes enhances and slows down that degradation of that region. And there are papers that has been written that shows actually that one of the studies by Kang that shows that long-term meditators have structural differences in both the gray matter and the white matter, and they've done the scientific work. And this is what Swamiji was talking about. Unarvin Allah Gavanipa, and the Sindan Allah, will be very good, you see. Other studies show the same thing, the routine practice is associated with long-lasting changes in the topology of the brain. So it induces something called the brain plasticity, the ability for the brain to be agile and process information and so on. What is all this got to do with enlightenment? And that's the question that one should always have, right? Because as I said, the brain is the seat of the mind. Without the brain, we can't experience this material world nor experience our own consciousness. Right? So here you see that, the way we see the world, the subtle motions become more profound when we meditate among meditators. So this is an important part of the brain that practicing meditation, at least I experienced it. I wanted to know why this was happening, and there was enough literature, enough experimentation, enough sampling that was done to do this testing. So it is not mystical. It is very, very scientific and experiential. I want to come back to another part of the brain. This is also really important, which is actually the brain where we call the temporal lobe, which is somewhere in the middle. There's two parts of it because the brain has two parts. So one is the left and the right temporal. Now, this is very important too. You see that when we practice meditation intensively, that part of the brain, the structural changes that happens, that part is very important for language understanding. We as a species have developed languages. Some people learn languages faster, understand language, the subtleties of the language. That part of the brain also processes speech, the verbal memory and learning. And when we meditate, we are able to listen very carefully, understand things better, and articulate things better. Our verbal memory, that means how we sequence that knowledge, that language, and how do we bring it together in proper sentence form. There's a learning that takes place, right? These are subtle things that we miss out. And you see that people who meditate properly, their command of the vocabulary and the language is profound. Is because this part of the brain evolves and develops more faster than an ordinary person. The language comprehension becomes really profound. Whether it's Sanskrit or whatever languages, when they deepen it, the nuances, the subtleties of the language becomes more and more profound. Right? The comprehension becomes really great. And this is something I personally experienced. I mean, I never used to read the scriptures, the Upanishads. But as I was going deeper, it drew me to the great scriptures, and the language that the great saints use is so profound that sometimes you got to go back to the dictionary and say, what are they trying to tell here? Right? So your comprehension of the world, understanding of the world, your articulation of the world becomes more profound and refined. The way you form your speeches, the way you articulate your words in poetry, in profound ways. That is why you see that when Mahan said very clearly that this knowledge came to somebody who doesn't speak Tamil. But when he learned to practice, suddenly the understanding of the language, the processing of the language, the verbal memory became so profound. He started writing poetry. Arivin, Arival, Arivin, Telugu, all these things came so profound, and the melody of processing this becomes wonderful. That is why you see people like Jalaluddin Rumi and great saints are great poets, because this part of the brain was evolving. They were able to describe this intangible, subtle nature of existence in a verbal form, in a poetry form, in an art form, that an ordinary human being would not be able to do it. So this part of evolution is so important for them to articulate, to experience, become aware and articulate this. And I found this is really amazing because as I was progressing in my meditation over the years, I say, what a wonderful language. When I read the Upanishads, when I read the scriptures, see the language that they use is so profound to describe this that it adds on to your own vocabulary because you understand it, you're able to process it, you're able to have that verbal memory, the vocabulary and the comprehension and the processing and string these sentences together into a wonderful melody. And this is great. Can you imagine as a youth, you learn this to be able to articulate your ideas? This is what you see that the great scientists and scholars are able to do, right? Put this complicated, complex things in simple language, in inspirational languages. So meditation actually helps one do this, right? So this is the left temporal lobe, and that's what nature has helped nurture. This is part of that speech and the comprehension. Nature's built it for us, and it's an evolutionary pathway. And if we harness this, we're able to tap into this very profound uh, gift that nature has blessed all of us. And the next one is actually on the right temporal lobe. This is earlier was verbal. The right temporal lobe, remember the brain has two parts, right? And scientists today know that that part of the brain is the left is important for verbalized communication. The right temporal lobe is for non-verbal memory. You experience this in your mind. One is you learn from verbal communication, but they also learn from non-verbal things in your memory. You think about it. This is about visual patterns, pattern recognition. You're able to look at patterns and geometry and things like that that becomes more profound. You're able to recognize images very well. And I'll tell you a story that when I was doing mathematics, I couldn't remember things, but as I was practicing meditation, I was able to visualize multiple dimensions in my head. And that helped me a lot in what I was studying. And I said, where did this come from? Not knowing that actually part of my brain was being developed or evolving as I was practicing this Mahan's meditation method. And it also helps you to process your emotions, the spatial coordination, understanding spatial processing, and the other aspect that I thought was really profound is that the brain was able to pick up tones and vibrations that it would not be able to pick up before. The vibrations, people talk about the Om and all the other things, but it's much more subtle vibrations, the resonations that a gross mind would not pick it up, but now you're able to pick it up. This is what the Unarvu Gavani, as we practice meditation, that vibration of the Kundalini, Mahan talks about the Unarvu. Most people say, I cannot feel it. But as you practice this, as this part of the brain evolves, the mind is able to pick up those tones, that vibrations, those rhythms, this Bhagavan's Gita that's spoken about in the Bhagavad Gita. The mind now is able to experience this, that frequency. Your mind is now getting into a wider frequency, a much more subtler frequency. And it helps the mind lock onto this as opposed to being caught up by the fleeting and, day-to-day frequencies. So for me personally, as practicing this, these all were happening, but I didn't know why this was happening. There's a part in Mahan's book, he talks about this aradharam, these parts of the brains will evolve, right? He already knew this. But, when I read it, I didn't understand it until I went into the literature to say, actually, these parts of the brains are very important for a human being to be able to experience this material world, to be able to experience one's own consciousness, to be able to experience one's own life force. And this helps the mind lock on to that vibration that gives us a much more subtle, more peaceful, more tranquil, more divine experiences that makes life a wonderful, you're able to see that this brain evolves because the gray matter and the white matter is developing. Even though you are aging, the mind becomes so alert, and it is able to harness the power within the brain to support the mind to understand its own existence and the universe. And this is beautifully explained by Swamiji that Yetada Tatparate says that abode of understanding the subtle part of me, eti, that means by practicing this intensively, Yipparamum Apparamum, that means all that wonderful divine internal and external cosmos, Yennul Nanarinden, he says, I was able to experience this within me. And what enabled that is that brain that is continuously evolving because it's harnessing the life force to enable the growth of the gray matter and the white matter, and the neural connectivity enables the flow of information and translating that information into knowledge, that knowledge into wisdom, and the wisdom into awareness, and the awareness into enlightenment. And this is exactly what Mahan was explaining in the I God philosophy, that this science, most people don't work out the step-by-step processes. So here it is, that there is meditation makes that structural changes in our brains to enable the brain to have that neural connectivity to be able to make sense of our life force, and the universe itself. And there's ample literature. I just pulled out two, but there are ample literature that actually talks about this. The seat of that mind, which is the brain, as it evolves, it opens up new channels of experiences, transcendental channels of experiences, that universal channel of experiences that an ordinary human being would not have this experience. Hence, would not live a life that is fulfilled, happy, joyful. When we practice this, you're always happy, you're always illumined, you're always, feeling fantastic. And that's what the life is all about. It reinforces. When we practice, the brain evolves, it helps the mind. The mind now starts doing more intensive introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation that reinforces that flow of energy, reinforces the neural connectivity and all the telomeres to bind properly. And that reinforces, helps the mind to evolve. So the evolution of the brain helps the evolution of the mind, that helps one with an enlightenment process. So that is what I want to cover today. And next class, I will talk about other parts of the brain that helps us to experience other things. And you see, there's 11 parts of our brains that is so crucial. Each one has its own function. And that is just that 11 parts are evolving because of a simple practice of introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation. When all of them evolve and all of them come together, it's a profound experience that one gets, that no words to describe. Right? So this is what I want to cover today, and I'll stop here. Next class, I'll talk about the other 2 to 3 areas of our brains that evolve. So there is a physiological change. So it's not mystical. It is real experience. Sandosha.